everyone. Welcome back. We are Pole on the Call podcast, and my name is Mændy Mac.
And I am Cris Rivers.
And today we are joined with the incredible pole coach and studio owner, Lauren, who is the owner of Sky High Studios in Massachusetts. And we're going to be talking a little bit about our pole journey, but mostly about pole studio best practices for teachers.
Yay.
Hi.
Thank you, Lauren, so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yay.
Yes, truly our pleasure. And let's get started because we have a lot we're going to discuss today. So, what started your pole journey? And I guess, how did your journey go to studio ownership?
Goodness. Okay. So, probably similar to a lot of people's journeys in one way, but not necessarily in another. So I actually started for a bachelorette party. So this was probably back in 2010. And to be honest, I was not excited about it. I was very much like, I don't know why we're doing this. Like, I know I'm not going to like it. I don't want to go. But whatever, it was a bachelorette party. So we went, and it was actually much more fun than I thought. And also, I kind of was like one of the only people that could do some of the things. So I kind of was like, I can do some stuff. And so I'm going to keep taking classes. So I actually ended up just continuing to take classes. And decided that I loved it. And at the time, I know this still happens a little bit, but it was much more prominent back, almost, it feels like it is almost 15 years ago now, was, I was doing it for probably about 8 months, and the studio owner at the time was like, hey, you can do a few spins and you can do a few things. Want to teach some classes? And I was like, sure. I got to hang out at the studio for free. I could still take the classes. So whatever, I did it. And I loved being a teacher. It was like, I'm lucky enough to still be friends with one of my original instructors. And one of the students who was actually in my first class is still a student here today. So I absolutely loved it. I made some really good relationships. And then it kind of started to take a downturn. My relationship with the studio owner broke down. And to the point where I did not feel the studio was a safe environment for my students anymore. I did not feel supported, either physically or just as a human being by ownership. And so I kind of just thought to myself, like, I could offer my students more for basically the same amount of money. Like, I could make sure that they have a safe environment. They have, the instructors have somebody who, treats them like a human being. And an owner who believes that students should be safe. You pay a lot of money for it. You have a right to a safe environment where you're not afraid that equipment is literally going to fall out from under you. So I was lucky enough to have some help to open Sky High. And so I started polling in 2010. And we opened in 2013. So we've been here ever since. So it's been a very wild ride, that's for sure. But I love it. I love it. So I wouldn't do anything different.
And it all started from a bachelorette party you did not want to go to.
Yes. It's a very strange story because most people are like, I saw it online. And I'd never done it anymore. I wanted to try a class. And my story's totally the opposite. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to have nothing to do. It just did not sound exciting to me. And the total opposite happened, and it really has both as a student and as an owner, really has affected my life. I mean, a lot of people talk about, you know, the physical benefits of doing pole. But for me, it really was life changing. That group of people that I really started polling with, you know, at the time I was, I don't know how personal you want to get, but I was in a really bad marriage. I don't have any family in the state. And that was really the first group of people, especially females, that ever looked at me and said, you can do this, and we're going to help you do it, and actively participated in my progress. And when I got frustrated, told me, I don't care if you're frustrated, you are still going to do this. And like, I just remember there were so many times in class where, you know, I remember, and I tell this story in my intro classes today, where I remember when my first teacher, we were doing pole walks, and I did what I now call the horsey stomp around the pole, just high-kneeing it, like stomping around the pole. And she looked at me and she goes, I don't know what the fuck that was. She goes, that was the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life, but we are going to change that, and we're going to change it right now. And so she had a sense of humor about it. She was honest about it, but there was no judgment. And there was no, like, I can't believe you just did that. It was just very much, all right, I don't know what that was. We're going to do something about that. And walked me through doing it until I felt good about it. And it gave me something to feel good about myself. And, you know, that kind of support really gave me not only physical confidence, you know, like, I think there is some level of mental and emotional strength that comes from feeling physically better about yourself, feeling physically stronger, feeling like you can do things. And that really did like work my confidence up to the point that I was able to like look at my life and go, this, like, I shouldn't be where I'm at. Like, my marriage is bad. It's not supporting me. I don't feel good about that part of my life. And especially being so far from home and not having family, having a group of people that said, we're here to support you in any way that we can. You deserve to be happy. You're becoming a confident person. You need a relationship that supports that and that does that. And so that actually those people gave me the confidence to actually get divorced and change my life. And so that, you know, was a really big step for me. And I don't think I probably would have done it, but I don't think I would have done it with the same level of confidence if I had not had that support. You know, and then the same thing happened when I went to open the studio is, you know, I had a group of supporters who said, yes, you should do this. Like, we know you can do it and you should. And if you do, we'll be there. And they came. You know, it was not empty. It was not empty support. It was not people saying, yeah, you should do whatever makes you happy. And then you do it and they're like, oh, that's nice that you did that. And then don't actually support you. So, you know, I was very grateful for the community aspect of it and the relationship building aspect of it. So that I could do this confidently and I could be successful at it. So that really made a big difference to me.
Yes, community is everything. And it makes it, I mean, it makes it so much better when you have similar interests in mind. Like,
Yes,
yes, thank you for sharing that honestly with us.
absolutely.
Right, it's so true. Like it, for me too, pole gave me a lot of confidence. Like it was, like I wasn't even thinking about how much it was changing me, both inside and outside.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm,
thank you for
for
sharing that
sure.
beautiful story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that's something that people don't realize that they need until they do it, because you kind of don't know what you don't have until you have it.
Mhm.
And then when you see what the impact is on your life, now that it's that you have that, you can't let it go. You can't give it up, and it changes you.
Yes.
Cole and Ariel changing our lives more than just our bodies.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Right. But then thank you so much for opening the studio and, being willing to perpetuate that and see that in others as well, because that's what it's all about.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
And now you can share some of the things you've learned as we get into our topic.
Yes.
Hey.
Right.
So,
I
go
kind of
ahead.
wanted to share a personal experience. This is not from like a pole studio, but this was before I was ever like a business owner or anything. When I was in my regular dance teaching journey, I was
Mhm.
hired by a dance studio and taught there for like almost a full year until all of a sudden they stopped paying me.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
then
wow.
like I would still go and teach because I cared about the dancers, I'm not gonna let them down. And then
Mhm.
like it came to the recital time and I still hadn't been paid and like I'm trying to like get paid and I don't want to not go to the recital because um so it ended up, being this whole ordeal. They owed me a lot of money and I ended up having to go file a police report on it and it ended up being they weren't even a registered business.
Mhm. Yeah.
So then it was clear to me that anybody can open a dance studio. You don't have to be knowledgeable.
Correct. Correct.
Holy shit. That's crazy.
Yes. And that's one of the things I don't think a lot of people understand about the not only the pole industry, but the dance industry is, you know, legally is a business. Like we're kind of lumped in with, with gyms and fitness centers, and it kind of falls under like the wellness if you're looking for like a business classification. But unlike gyms or fitness centers where they're governed by kind of like higher organizations, and you have to, if you want to work at a gym, you have to have certain qualifications in order to work there. In many cases, a bachelor's degree is required in fitness or physical sciences. There's any number of fitness certifications that are out there that are required. And this, I've worked in gyms. I've worked in several gyms, before I owned the studio. Even when I did own the studio, I still had another job for a while. And you know, and in order to be kind of, an accredited fitness center, you have to join these other organizations. And there's national and international organizations. And they have all kinds of conferences. You have to keep up with continuing education credits. You have to do all of those to maintain your job and your education and your credibility. And with boutique fitness studios and dance studios, those same credentials don't exist. These are not regulated industries. So anybody can own them. And anybody, I really can teach there. There's no way to really, credit people with certain certifications or whatever. They exist out there, but they're not regulated either. So it's a little bit kind of crazy how that kind of works, especially when you're dealing, in issues of people's safety and things like that, and making sure you have knowledgeable staff. So, you know, that opens both the instructor and the business owner open to a lot of weird stuff that can happen. And it can be very hard to kind of know what is the right thing here? Like, what is supposed to happen? What are the limits within I'm working as an employee, and how do I really have to operate my business? And if you don't know, then you don't know.
Right? And then you learn as you go. And if we're all just learning from each other, it's the telephone game.
Exactly. Exactly. And I really do think that most business owners really are just trying to do their best, right? We want to run a good business. We want to make a little bit of money so that we can support ourselves, you know. We want to have good instructors and we want our students to enjoy themselves. I really do believe that that's what 95% of us really are working towards. But just like in any industry, there are people that also are knowingly doing weird stuff. And in many cases, illegal things. And so I really do think that you, as the employee, as the instructor, you know, or the staff member in any capacity, need to educate yourself. And you really need to know, you know, how you should be paid and what behaviors you should look for in an ethical employer. And you should know what to do if those things don't happen.
Before we started this episode, while we were contacted, we went over the outline. Are there things that you think every employee should remember based on this outline? There's some pretty good things here.
Yeah,
Should we
yeah,
also like talk about the difference between employee and an independent contractor as well?
yes, yes. So, quick disclaimer before we go any further.
Yes.
I am not a legal, financial, or HR professional. I am a business owner who's had to learn from my own mistakes. I've paid a lot of people a lot of money to educate me on what I should and should not be doing, usually after the fact, you know. And my goal here is to educate. I don't want to scare people. I just want to educate people. I mean, I would rather keep people from making the same mistakes that I have made as an owner and as an employee, and just help everybody kind of like work together to kind of make this a little bit easier for everybody. Business owners and instructors together. So, so some things to remember that, you know, just to kind of recap is, remember that whole is not a regulated industry, and you have to educate yourself to really make sure that you know what should be happening. And that, you know, because most business owners are most of us are trying to do our best. So you as the employee, have a little bit of empathy for your business owner. Don't assume that they are just doing things to like be weird about it, or that they're trying to hide things from you in some way. Business owners have to be everything all the time, and it's impossible to know 100% of all the things that we should be doing. So have some empathy and keep the communication open. And then keep an eye out for weird stuff. If something doesn't feel good, if something feels off, then kind of trust your gut on that and do some research, talk to some other people, and, you know, keep the awareness going. I think that covers everything from the outline. Am I correct? Yeah? Okay. All right. So you, Mandy, kind of asked the question, like, what is the difference between a W-2, which Massachusetts defines an employee as anybody who is a W-2 employee. So that's when you fill out the W-4 tax form. All right. And W-9 employees are the independent contractors. So just for the sake of keeping things clear, if I use employee, I'm talking about a W-2 person. If I independent contractor is the W-9 person. So there are several differences between the two. The big ones are when you're an employee, you have the right to be paid biweekly. You accrue sick time per the state. Even if you're part-time, you do accrue sick time. You receive payment stubs, your paycheck stubs, and you have freedom from retaliation. So Massachusetts uses it's kind of a 3-point system. It's called the ABC test. And you can find this on the mass.gov website. So in Massachusetts, all workers are considered, you're presumed an employee unless you meet all 3 of the criteria. You have to meet all 3. And if you do, then you're considered an independent contractor. So those are 1, control. So am I free from control or direction in connection with the performance of a service? So if my employer controls my schedule, if they control the curriculum, if they control my pay rate, if they decide how well or how not well I'm doing my job, then you're an employee. Course of business. So am I offering a service that is outside the normal course of business? And if I am, then I'm an independent contractor. If I'm not, then I'm an employee. So a good example of that would be like as a pole studio, right? If my students were interested in a Zumba class, but I don't want to offer it as part of our normal services, I can hire a Zumba teacher. And they tell me, all right, I have Tuesday at 7:00 available to do a class. Here's my pay rate. And I go, great, that sounds fabulous. They come in and they teach their Zumba class once a week and they go home. So that kind of meets those kind of first 2 criteria. So, and then the last one is independent business. So an independent contractor is basically self-employed. So this bullet point kind of is, am I solely reliable on this job to make a living, but I have an existing separate business in the same field? So am I, if I might be a pole instructor, right? But I'm only here for 1 class a week. And I'm working at 7 different studios. So this is a service that I'm offering to multiple people. And the combination of all of that kind of makes up my living, or do I own another gym and I'm just coming here to teach a class here once a week? So that's kind of the 3rd criteria. So if you meet all 3 of those, then you're an independent contractor. If even one of those you don't meet, you're considered an employee. So do you guys have any questions on that? I know that was a lot of information and it can be a little bit confusing sometimes on what qualifies as like part of those bullet points.
Yeah, no, I think it's just so interesting because I mean, I worked always as a dance instructor. I've always been an independent contractor in Connecticut and Massachusetts, and there's like one of those bullets that I don't meet.
It is very confusing, and each state has its own kind of test. And the state of Massachusetts worked with the federal government as part of the Federal Labor Act to kind of come up with this system. And so that they could kind of be covered under whatever the Federal Labor Act was. I forget exactly what the name of it is. So if you're a studio not in Massachusetts, definitely go to whatever. In Massachusetts, we have a really great government website that has tons of information on it. Go to whatever your government website is and find out what the criteria are for your state, because there is no federal like test for this. They leave it up to the states to define what an independent contractor versus an employee is. So these bullet points are only for Massachusetts.
Right, you're absolutely right. What tipped me off that something was awry was when we had our interview with Allison Sipes, who's in Florida, and she said for their independent contractors, they have to bring all their own equipment.
Yep. And that's one, if you, I think I included it in one of the websites, that's kind of one of the qualifications is like in the normal course of business, am I using the business's equipment or am I using my own? And if you're using the business's equipment, then you're probably an employee. If you're required to bring your own and you're not being reimbursed for it, you're an independent contractor. So that's not technically on the list, but there are, when you do the research for it, that does come up in several places as kind of like a hidden kind of criteria as part of, kind of comes under the control aspect of it is, are they controlling my equipment? Are they controlling what I'm using? Then yes, I'm an employee.
It almost seems like there should be a third sort of type, just like the dance studios are unregulated, like we're all just like running around awry.
Yes.
Maybe there needs to be something specifically for us.
It would be nice. It would be nice. I mean, massive. I was really, I'll kind of tell you the story because it'll kind of help like other people figure out kind of how I had to kind of do this research. So when I started, I started with employees right out of the gate. And I did that mostly because they're covered under my liability insurance policy and they're have workers' comp. I pay workers' comp insurance. So kind of, I'll go into a little bit more of that kind of in the next section. But having employees is expensive, right? Like you have to pay for all of this stuff to have employees. So at the time I'd gone to my CPA and said, can I do this? Like here's what I'm paying for the employees. Can I switch them to independent contractors? And he said, yes. He said, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I did. Well, about 9 months later, I had switched CPAs because this person kind of did something I didn't like. So I got a new CPA. And roughly at the same time, my payroll company had come to me about their human resources division. Because I have paychecks. So they have just their payroll department and then they have their human resources department. And so she came and I figured, what the hell, I'll talk to them, right? Like, I don't know what's going on. Good to have some information. So, so I talked to the human resources person first. And I was like, so my contractors, like they signed this handbook. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, like, I want them to like follow these rules. And she goes, yeah, they're contractors. They don't have to follow any of your rules. They don't have to do anything. And I was like, well, I don't like that. And she goes, well, too bad. So I said, well, my CPA, my old CPA, I said I could do it. And she goes, well, you need a new CPA. And I was like, well, lucky for me, I got one. So she advised that I will go back and I talked to my CPA about it. So I did. And, once I had like transferred over all my tax documents, she goes, well, I don't see that you paid out any payroll. And I said, well, the old CPA said I could switch to independent contractors. And she goes, you're a corporation. You shouldn't have contractors. And so I kind of went, well, shit. So immediately I switched all of my employees back to being in W-2 employees. Like, just, I messaged my employees the next day and I said, all right, I got bad advice. This is not how this is supposed to be set up. I apologize. My bad. I need to switch everybody back. And so within a year, my employees had switched twice. So, which was not fun for any of us. Like, it really didn't cause a lot of upset, but it does, you're messing with people's taxes. They didn't have taxes taken out. Now they do. They're switching. So it was a pain in the butt. And, so for the disclaimer, when I say find a good professional, find somebody who's educated, get a reference, because get a business reference, not a personal one. Find somebody who does good corporate taxes. Because that's not something that I ever should have done. And I really had to re-educate myself. In the beginning, I had them as employees because they got benefits. There were specific benefits that they got. And when I switched back to when I switched them back to W-2s, now I had to do it because that's legally where they're supposed to be at. And so that was kind of a costly mistake for me to do that. So I kind of really had to go through like a re-education of really what does it mean for people to be employees versus contractors. So this is definitely a journey that I've gone on myself, same as a lot of other owners have to do. So, so that was fun. Not even a little bit. So, yeah. I would love for everybody to avoid that mistake. Like, don't do it.
All right. Thank you for sharing this. And I'm sorry that, you had to learn the hard way. And also, I will have to also learn the hard way. It's just that we all, like I said, every single job that I've had as a dance instructor has been as an independent contractor. So it's just really interesting that we all just did that. Yeah.
It's a very easy assumption to make. So, however, there's benefits to both sides, and I'm not judging studios that do that, because that does work for other studios, whether or not it's like really according to the state, the way that they should be classifying them, but it does work. And you have to definitely, as an employee, ask yourself, like, are the benefits kind of like on either side? Like, which one do I want to choose? And I mean, there's pros to both, right? As a W-2, my taxes are taken out through the course of the year so that I don't have to pay a big chunk at the end of the year. When you're an employee, you have benefits, right? Like, I'm eligible for unemployment benefits. I'm eligible for workers' compensation. I'm eligible for paid sick leave. I can't remember. I think that all employees are definitely eligible for the PFML, which is the paid medical family leave. I don't think independent contractors are covered under that. However, I may be incorrect, but I believe that it's only employees. And you also have additional labor protections if something happens at work. there are other protections that the state has for employees. All your work time is paid. Like when you're an employee, staff meetings are paid for. Everything that you do should be paid for. I mean, we use Slack at the studio. And so every month I pay my employees for a minimum like 1 hour of just time that they spend sending messages. Hey, can somebody cover my classes, or communicating with a student about a class or whatever it is. Like they get paid for that time. Even if you like your performance review, you're paid for that. Like everything should be accounted for. And you're also covered by minimum wage transparency. Massachusetts also has something called, I forget exactly what the name of it, but it's like right to pay transparency, where you can communicate with your fellow employees about how much are they getting paid, like what are their benefits. And you can't be like, your company can't retaliate against you for doing that. There used to kind of be like a don't ask, don't tell policy when it came to pay rates. But with kind of the wage equality movement, that is now something that Massachusetts protects in the workplace. And you're usually covered by your studio's liability insurance policy. So all of those are benefits to being an employee. On the other hand, if you're an independent contractor, you set your own schedule, you create your own content, you have control over your pay rates. Like instead of the studio telling you what they're going to pay you, you get to tell them, well, this is what my rate is. And the studio can kind of take it or leave it, you determine your own curriculum and your own content. Like you're not bound by whatever the studio sets for you. And you're not subject to any requirements at all. Like there's no performance reviews, there's no performance requirements. If the studio doesn't like what you're doing, they can just say, well, that was nice, see you later, bye. And you have the ability to do that too. I mean, even as a W-2 employee, you have that, but there's kind of a little bit more of a dance around doing that. But as a contractor, you can just go, all right, I'm out. Thanks for playing, But that being said, both of those do have legal protections against discrimination in the state of Massachusetts. You still can't discriminate against independent contractors for any reason. And there are, or whatever, what are considered protected classes, as my HR professional likes to tell me. So, age, race, gender, identity, like any of those kinds of things, you still can't discriminate against independent contractors for. And even if you're W-2, Massachusetts does have an at-will policy, which legally says that the studio, your job, can let you go at any time for any reason. That clause does exist. However, as an employee, if that happens, there are some steps that you can take after the fact that make that a little bit more difficult. And that's mostly to protect the employee, such as if an employer lets you go for no reason, well, you still get unemployment benefits, but not generally if you're fired. So you can contest that. You can contest if an employer denies your unemployment request. Well, you can contest that and you'll have to go to court, but you can show, well, they didn't give me an opportunity to improve myself. And the state can go, okay, well, in that case, you have a right to your unemployment benefits. So, in many ways, being a W-2 employee protects the employee from weird actions against their employer in any industry.
So much information to think about. Do you have like, because I've heard you've given us a lot of information, so much, but I've also heard a lot of stories, especially like in other parts of the country, where these things aren't happening. How would you advise people to kind of have these conversations or to fix these issues without having to like burn any bridges or go behind people's backs if they can, like without having to like go the legal route?
So are you referring to people who are already employed at a studio versus somebody who would like to teach?
I guess both.
Okay.
As the person who likes to teach will probably learn that okay, this is different and maybe something has to change.
Okay. So I'll kind of start with, I think the easiest place to start is with new employees, like somebody who's a potential employee, because that will also kind of give people who are current employees some questions that they can start thinking about before they approach their studio about it. Because these are also questions that you can ask in addition to some other ones. So I think as a new employee, the number one thing you have to think about is that you have the right to ask questions. You have the right to interview the studio just as much as they're interviewing you. And so these are things that you need to know and you have a right to know. So ask them, what type of business are they running? Are they an LLC? Are they a corporation? Are they a DBA? Like, what is their status? Because a lot of times that can lead you to how you should be paid. So, ask them, what kind of documentation am I going to be required to sign? What tax documents are you having me sign? What is the orientation process? And if they tell you that they don't have any paperwork for you to sign, well, that's a huge red flag right from the beginning. So, how do they pay their employees? Come right out and ask, what kind of employee am I going to be? How do you track my hours? How are you going to track how I'm supposed to get paid? And how do you pay me? Am I getting paid direct deposit? Am I getting paid via check? What kind of records do you keep? Do I have access? Will I have access to my payroll records? Do you have a handbook? And in that handbook, what expectations do you outline for me as an employee? So those are all things that you have the right to ask before you even consider taking the job. And on top of that, what is their disciplinary process? If something goes wrong, how do we come to a resolution? And so your potential employer should be able to answer all these questions without hesitation. And if there is any hesitation on these, or if they don't have a direct answer for you, that is a really big red flag. They should be able to answer these. These are simple questions, and they should be answered every single time. So I think that gives current employees a place to start, right? Because I have had employees that have worked at other studios, and I've been open 11 years, so this has come up a lot over the past 11 years. So, and I've asked them, well, how are you getting paid? Like, are you a W-2 or an independent contractor? And they go, I don't know. So, well, you work there, you should know. So those are all questions that as a current employee, you have the right to ask. And the company should be able to provide you with records of any form and how you're getting paid. There has to be a tracking system. So you can ask them, what is my classification? And you can even say, look, I'm trying to get my tax stuff situated. Here's some things that I need to know. What is my employee classification? Can I see my paperwork? So if you are having them signing paperwork as the employer, you as the employee should have access to that. And if they tell you no, okay, well, now they're hiding something, right? So I use the Paychex system. That's my payroll provider. All of their documentation is in Paychex. If they want to see something, I can give them, I just click a button and it gives them access to see it. Like, I don't have anything to hide from my employees. So if they say no, that's a huge problem. You know, and can I have a copy of my payroll history? You know, and if they also can't provide that, that's also a big red flag. So those are, I think, you know, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's a place to start. Because the answers that you receive start to clue you in on what are the behaviors that I now need to start being aware of? And what are some other questions I should start to ask? And so, you know, that first, before I move on to that part, do you guys have any questions about any of this stuff?
I guess this is more for like the I guess when teachers go to ask their employer like what type of business they are.
Mhm.
Does it matter like if it's an LLC or sole proprietor? Are they going to have different?
They can, because your business setup, like, it can kind of clue you in many ways. So like as a corporation, I mean, I can employ independent contractors, but if all of my staff are if I have 16 instructors and, you know, all of them are independent contractors, like, that is weird, because as a corporation, 95% of my employees or my workers should be employees. So if I'm classifying everybody but myself as an independent contractor, then that kind of tells the employee that something weird might be going on. So it doesn't necessarily affect the employee, but it is a signal to how is this person operating their business. If you do a DBA or an LLC, tax-wise, you know, I'm not one of those, so I don't exactly know like what the limitations or the rules are kind of like surrounding those. I know that there are kind of some different things, some different options that they have. So if you are one of those businesses, you should talk to your tax person or a legal professional to find out exactly what that means for you, because I only know really what it means for me. But it can clue you as the employee in on maybe some questionable things that might be happening if they're not paying their employees, or if they're not paying their workers as employees.
So many things to think about.
Yeah, it's not, there's a lot. And that's the thing, like, as an employee, you can't jump to the conclusion that the studio is doing something wrong, right? There's a lot to think about. And I know studio owners and studios where, you know, all of their people are independent contractors. But, you know, when it comes to ethical behavior, right? the difference is they go to those studios, they do their work, they get paid, they come home, there's no issues, they know exactly what the expectations are, they know what they're being paid for, they know how the studio is going to treat them, and that makes a huge difference in having those conversations with your studio, because for many small businesses, like, unless you're doing something wildly crazy, the state normally isn't going to come knocking at your door, So if you're generally being an ethical studio owner, you really don't have a lot to worry about. It's when you start doing weird stuff that it clues the employees in that something is not right here. And that's the thing with being an independent contractor, is like, you don't have the same protections that employees, those classified as employees, have. And so my recommendation is, it's just better to be an employee. Sometimes it's easier and it's cheaper to be an independent contractor, but in the long run, it's better to be an employee because you're just more protected against unethical behavior. And if you're in an ethical studio, great. But let's take your dance studio example, right? Where you weren't getting paid. You're an independent contractor. You don't really have a lot of legal recourse. I mean, you might be able to take them to small claims court, right? But if they don't have records that you taught, if you don't have previous pay stubs from them that shows what your teaching history is, if none of that information is available, the state's going to look at you and go, well, you're an independent business owner. Sometimes you lose.
That's exactly what happened.
Yes.
They stayed in business for at least another year because I sounded off on it on the internet, and a teacher contacted me a year later saying the same thing happened to them.
Yep. It happened to the studio that I left when I opened Sky High. She ended up selling it to somebody else, and they weren't able to pay their employees, and one of them had to take her. And luckily, the girl who was taking them to court, she had a record of all the times that she had kept her own records that she could turn into the court and say, I've kept track of all the times that I've been paid. Here's all the dates that I taught. Here's what I wasn't paid for. And luckily, she was able to win in that instance. But most people are not. Like, the state just assumes, like, you're an independent business owner. Those are the risks that you take. And so, and it's not like, working as a contractor, like a building contractor. And if they don't pay, well, you can take all of the materials out. Like, if they're not paying you on time, you can stop the work and you can kind of leave people in a lurch, but you can't get that time back. You can't get that life back. You're paid for something that you gave away, and the studio didn't pay you for it, So, so that's a position that, unfortunately, a lot of people still find themselves in, and I know a lot of good business owners that do have their employees at independent contractors, and it's fine. There are no issues, and according to the state, it might not be like the right way, according to the state of Massachusetts, but they're doing the best that they can, and they're running an ethical business. And on the flip side, I also know of some studios where that doesn't happen,
Right. And listening to all of this, like, my studio's in Massachusetts. I'm a sole proprietor. All of my teachers are independent contractors. And yeah, like the of those three bullet points, it's mostly like the name your own price thing, which I would actually consider changing, because honestly, like why not? But also our insurance covers
Mhm.
our independent contractors as well. So
Mhm.
and as far as like what you said about we're all trying our best, like am
Yeah, I mean, that's the majority of us, right? Like, we all start a business. Like, nobody starts a business. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but most people don't start a business going like, how many ways can I take advantage of people?
right? We try to make it mutually
Yeah,
beneficial.
yes. We're not going to stay, well, most of us are not going to stay in business if that's what we're doing and if we do it continuously.
Mm.
And so, you know, there are ways to make it work. And you have to, is an owner, you have to look at yourself and go, okay, what is best for my business and what is best for my employees, and find the areas where those converge
Mm.
and make it work.
Yeah.
And when you're transparent with your employees about how they're getting paid, then they have confidence in you, right? Like, here's how you're getting paid, here's why I'm paying you that way, and here are the expectations. And when you don't get that, there's no security as an employee. And how can I do a good job if I don't feel secure? And then they're put in this really awkward position that you've been in and I've been in, where I love what I do and I love my students. And you don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that connection. You don't want to lose that enjoyment. But we all have a breaking point where that no longer becomes worth the cost. Like, that cost benefit analysis collapses. And so when you, regardless of whether you are an employee or you're an independent contractor, you have to educate yourself on what are my rights, what are the differences, what do I want, right? Some people want to be independent contractors, okay, then you got to find a studio that's going to pay you that way. And then you kind of have to know where to go from there, like what to look out for and where to go from there. So when you're already an employee and you want to approach your studio owner, if you have the answers to all these questions and you don't need to approach your employer about it. Things are fine. I don't need to rock the boat. This is good. Great. If that's not the case and you need to approach your employer about it, once you've kind of asked all of these other questions, the next thing you really kind of want to do is you want to be open-minded, right? Keep that thing in mind that I know my studio owner is trying to do the best that they can.
The empathy.
And yes, and I just want to approach them to have a conversation about kind of why are we doing it this way? And come from a point where I'm trying to educate myself and I have some information to educate you. Don't assume that they have the worst intentions. Don't be accusatory. All you're going to do is you're going to make your studio owner very defensive and very reactive. And that really can change your relationship on a dime. Because if me as an owner, if I don't trust one of my employees, that's a big problem. That's a big problem for any studio owner, is if I don't trust one of my employees or I feel like they're out to get me, right? And use the owner are put in this weird position between justifying your business, right? And having a comfortable work environment. So, so just be calm, be there to educate, and then be open-minded and listen to your studio owner and give them the benefit of the doubt. Because you can use that conversation to kind of not only use that as an opportunity to kind of create a new relationship with your owner, right? Because if I feel that somebody's coming to me with information and they have something that they'd like to share, or they have a concern, that's an opportunity for us to grow the relationship. And so, but if you follow all of that and you come at them with that, and they have a reaction that kind of throws your gut off, now you got to be on the lookout. And there are some behaviors you have to look for, and there are some things that you have to do to protect yourself. Because you as the employee need to feel secure that if something goes awry, then I know what to do. And I know how to approach it. Any questions on that before I move on to the next part? I don't want to rush anybody.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about like workshop leaders, because those are true independent contractors, right?
Yep.
And so as far as like pay for them, is it okay to negotiate?
So that's are you talking like traveling instructors?
I guess in general, for as far as independent contractors go, if they give a price, like, is it not a good idea?
I mean, I wouldn't say no. I mean, right, you can negotiate everything.
Okay.
You can even negotiate your employees' pay, right? Like if I have an instructor and I said, well, our pay rate is, I don't know, $35 an hour, whatever it is. And they say, well, at my last studio, I was an employee, but I was getting paid $40 an hour. Like that can always be negotiated. The same thing with independent contractors, and anybody can walk away from it at any time. So I would just be cautious with, I don't know, my views on this have kind of changed over the years, right? Like there are some people that I know that I'm not going to negotiate with. Like I know they're worth their money and I'm not going to negotiate with them. If I don't know you and you don't have a history, like a travel history, or like you're not really heard of. I know like the whole celebrity thing has kind of fallen off the rails since I started anyway. That used to be a thing that's not really a thing anymore. And I think that your workshop is too expensive. Yeah, I'll negotiate with I have a contract that
I was gonna say
make some people sign.
we could still do contracts with independent contractors.
Yep. So I have my own studio contract with traveling. Yeah, because that's the one I sent you, right? That outlines the whole thing. So I mean, yeah, I go for it if you want to try. Yeah. Yeah, you can.
I feel like there's some things that like I've come to in the business world, like on my own, that makes sense, that like resemble the things that are what we're supposed to do. So it's just very interesting. And I still keep thinking that there should be another third.
Yeah. I agree. But until then, we're kind of stuck in this like weird gray area.
Yeah.
So yeah. Any other questions on that part?
No, I think that was good for that.
That was good. Okay. So I think kind of the next place to go from here is like what kind of constitutes ethical behavior and unethical behavior by your employer? I mean, in general, like if you see any of these things, regardless of whether you're kind of being paid or not as an employer, an independent contractor, tell you something about the person, but specifically as it pertains to how you're being paid, right? So some things to look out for are requests for work without pay, right? Like one of the things about being an independent contractor is your employer can't make anything mandatory. as an employer, as an employee, my studio can mandate like staff meetings, but I have to be paid for that staff meeting. If I'm an independent contractor, the business can say, hey, we're having a staff meeting, and you can go, great, have at it. I won't be there because you're not required to be, right? So if your studio says, hey, we're having a staff meeting, and it's unpaid, then as an employee, you go, well, if it's not paid, it's not mandatory. It's just not. I don't have to be there for free. Other demands not in line with your job classification. So if I'm an independent contractor and the studio says to me, well, you know, as part of your classes, it's required that you work the front desk for 15 minutes before and 15 minutes after. Nope. You're paying me for the class. So I will be here 5 minutes before class to set my class up. I'm teaching the class, and I will lock up 5 minutes after I leave. You can't require anything of me that doesn't fit my classification. If your pay rates are dependent on other jobs. So that's a form of discrimination. So if your studio owner comes to you and says, well, if you work at other studios, then this is your rate. If you work only for us, then you get an exclusivity bonus, or you get like, that is crazy talk. Like, you should be paid on your skills or on what you're teaching or the time that you're there. Not like, even in Massachusetts, if you have a non-compete agreement, which Massachusetts at this point has almost eliminated non-competes completely. So if you have employees, look at your non-compete agreement. That's next on my list of things to do. So I can't tell my employees that if they work for a competitor, they don't make as much. That doesn't exist. And that's a huge red flag, like completely. If your employer can't justify their pay rates, like if they tell you, because even as employees, like, one, if you're an independent contractor, they don't have to give you raises at all. That you're determining your own rates. So you can change those at any time and just talk to unless you have a contract in place that says this is my rate for this amount of time, then it is what it is, right? If I'm an employee, the state doesn't have to, the employers are not required to give cost of living raises. That's not a requirement. Most raises in Massachusetts are merit-based or like duration-based. So, and usually those are contingent on whether or not the business can afford pay rates. So, but if you ask your employer, hey, I'm getting paid this much, how come I'm not getting paid this much? Then if your employer goes, that's just the way it is. Well, that's not an answer. They should be able to tell you, well, you know, this is kind of where everybody starts. This is what happens after the next step. You know, this is what happens, like, you know, at your performance review, or not many, I don't know of a lot of studios that do performance reviews, but if you do a performance review, then it's based off of this scale. You know, I mean, my husband works for a huge company in Massachusetts, and I literally have no fucking clue how they pay their employees, because they're supposed to have a matrix and they don't use it. So, like, your employer should be able to justify and explain your pay rate to you. If there's no transparency, if you ask to see your documentation and they say no. Now, legally as an employer, I don't have to show you all your documentation. You don't have to have access to all of it. There's certain documents that I am required to show you. And only have to do that under supervision, right? You can ask to see your personnel file and we can set an appointment and you can see it while I'm standing here watching you look at it. And I don't have to give you copies of that. I think that's stupid. But like they can have copies of all their documents. I don't care. Like, sure, take it. You signed all of it when you started. There's nothing I'm hiding. And then are there frequent changes in pay rates or policies? So like if the owner is coming to you every couple of months and they're saying, okay, this is the way we're doing it now. Nope, never mind. Now we're doing it this way. Nope, forget that. Like that is a sign that they either have no clue what they're doing or they're changing things to get around what they're supposed to be doing. And neither of those are good things, right? Like, I mean, I have an employee handbook that I change once a year. Like I can update it quarterly, but normally I go in, I change it once a year, I send it out to everybody and they have to sign a little thing that says, yep, got the handbook, I'm good to go. And so they kind of like re-agree to it every year. So, so those are some like weird behaviors to look out for. If your employer does none of those things, and you feel confident that you're being treated ethically and with integrity, then great. That's how it should be, And I think that it's harder for employees today to kind of know what to look for, right? So like when I started 15 years ago, I was treated like crap. Like I didn't have to know any of this to just know that I was not being treated well. I was getting paid $10 an hour, cash, no workers' comp, no unemployment. I wasn't covered by their liability insurance. Like, thank God nobody got hurt under my care, especially considering some of the conditions in the studio. And so I think a lot of people who kind of were in the pole industry as it started to become mainstream looked at it and went, this is not right. And most people took active steps to change that for themselves and for their employees, regardless of how their employees were being paid. And I think that's a good thing. And so it makes it harder now, I think, for new employees to know what to be aware of. And also, there's not necessarily kind of the same level of appreciation for when your employer does the right thing, which is what should happen all the time. And that's really the way it should be, right? They shouldn't have to appreciate that it's not shitty and that you're not doing something wrong. Like that should not be the standard is, oh, wow, like they're actually doing things correctly. That should just be the expectation, to just be treated well as an employee. But if you're a studio owner who came from that kind of, from that environment, you look at kind of some of the new employees and you go, wow, they don't know. And they don't know what they don't know, right? And that's good. They shouldn't have to experience that. But it does create a little bit of a disconnect in terms of communication, I think sometimes. So, yeah. Any questions about that?
No, that's great advice for employees of all industries.
Yes. Yes. So that being said, there are ways that you can protect yourself as an employee. Are you guys ready for me to move on to that section? Okay, great. So I think really the first thing you can do is educate yourself. There are so many resources out there. if you're in Massachusetts, again, I can only speak to Massachusetts, but there's tons of free legal advice out there. There are law firms that have like free blogs that you can look at. The Massachusetts website has loads of information on it. And if you go to their labor page, it's the Department of Labor Standards or something like that. There's so many resources on there, and there's a number you can call and you can ask them questions about, hey, here's what's happening. Is this how it's supposed to be? So, and that's free. Just take advantage of it. The state doesn't charge you for that. So educate yourself and know your rights. Know your rights as employee. So that regardless of how you're being paid, whether you're an independent contractor or whether you're an employee, you know what the expectations are, so that if they ask you to do something that's not within your job classification, you can respond to that. Create a relationship with your owner. If you don't have one, create a relationship with them and open that dialogue and be just open to listening to them as well. Because the better your relationship is with the owner, and I'm not talking a personal relationship, like not going out to drinks, like not calling each other all the time, like develop a professional relationship with them so that you feel like you have confidence in them and that you can talk to them, and that if you have concerns that that they're going to listen to you. I think that's a huge thing that people don't think about. And when things come up, that's going to be the first step. Is my relationship with my owner strong enough that we both feel comfortable having a conversation about concerns or issues? If you're an independent contractor, have your own documentation. Have a contract with the studio that says, here's what my schedule is. Here's what I'm going to be teaching. Here's what my pay rate is. And here's how long this contract is going to be in effect before we renegotiate. And here are the terms of keeping me, and here are the terms of leaving me, and here's what you can expect from me. I think that for an independent contractor, that's huge, because if you have that, and get some legal help with it. Because there's a lot that's out there that you kind of wouldn't think to put in it until something happens. So put it in there. And that way, that does give you some recourse. So if your studio owner decides not to pay you, you can go and you can say they signed a document that says this is how much they're going to pay me. This is how often I'm going to get paid. And none of this has happened. Here's the date that it stopped happening. So keep all of your own records and keep all your own documentation. Talk to your fellow instructors as well. Again, in the state of Massachusetts, employees have the right to wage transparency. Talk to them about it. Not in a way that's going behind your owner's back, but if you have questions, ask another employee, what they're experiencing before you bring it to your owner's attention. So, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, and set boundaries. Studio owners get very overwhelmed. They have a lot to do. There are a lot of things to their employees and to their business. Sometimes they forget. Sometimes they just don't communicate well. So stand up for yourself and set boundaries, but do it from a place of understanding. And do it from a place of like, look, these are kind of the terms of my employment. If you want me to do that thing, then, you know, I'm willing to do it, but here's how it works with me as an employee, you know, or I don't feel like I understand why you're asking me to do that, but I don't feel comfortable doing it. Don't haul off and start accusing them or, you know, coming at a place of conflict. Because chances are they're not trying to create conflict. They're just trying to run their business. But when you do start to feel taken advantage of, you need to find a way to stand up for yourself and set the terms of your employment. You know, if you're an independent contractor and the employer says, you know, yep, here's what you have to do, and it's not coming in and teaching for a class, then you can say, according to the contract we set out, that does not fall in within the parameters of my employment. If you need me to do it this one time, I'll do it, but I'm not doing that continuously for you. You need to hire a front desk person. Like you can compromise, you can tell them, you can set those boundaries without, you know, being a hard ass. But if the pattern persists, you're going to have to really be firm with your employer, you know. And if you're an employee, you know, and your employer's doing something wacky, sit down with them and say, hey, like, I noticed this has been happening. Like, as an employee, here's what's supposed to happen. So how do we resolve this? You know, and start there. And then if things go really awry, nowhere to go. You as the employee have the right to anonymously, and this is a last resort. I would never advocate that any employee do this unless they had absolutely no recourse left. But you as the employee have the right to anonymously report unethical or improper payroll practices to the state of Massachusetts. And the state legally has to open an investigation, even if it's a false claim. That should be the end, like I have no other option to get this resolved. Because as a business owner, I would not want that done to me. I would want to work with my employees as much as possible to get whatever it is resolved. And I would never advocate that any employee does that to any business just because you're slightly disgruntled. That's not fair. And that's a shitty thing to do. You know, but there are employers out there who really do take advantage of their employees or their contractors. And as an owner, when that behavior is illegal, or it's so unethical that you're actually damaging your employees' financial stability or their mental and emotional health, then that makes all of us as owners look bad. And it depletes the confidence in our industry. And if that employee has that experience, or that independent contractor has that experience with a studio, how can they trust that they're not going to have that experience somewhere else? And then we as an industry lose really good employees. We lose really good teachers. We kill the enthusiasm that we could get from really great people. And that is a really sad thing. So you as the employee should do everything that you can to work that out with your owner. And if you don't like being there, don't be there. Don't be there. And unless their practices are egregious, just walk away. Walk away. Find a place that has a good reputation. Take some classes there and talk to the employees. Take a class and say, I had a great class. How do you like working here? What's your favorite part about being at this studio? You know, you'll be able to tell really easily, probably just from their facial expressions, whether or not they're having a good time. And, you know, being an instructor at a pole studio has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. Like, sincerely, I have met so many amazing people. My staff here is incredible. Like, they're just amazing people. They're amazing instructors. Like, I want them here. I want them to stay. I want them to be here. And the best way to keep them is to do the things that make employees happy, right? So, you know, as an owner, you can't take that gift for granted. Your employees are giving you their lives, they're giving you their time, they're giving you their bodies. This is a hard job. That's something that really should be appreciated, you know, and you as the employee should feel valued. You should feel compensated. You should feel safe. And you should do everything you can to, you know, keep that relationship going. You know, sometimes your enthusiasm as an employee rubs off on the owner. I know that there have been days where I've had a really hard time coming in here for whatever reason. And my employees are so excited to be here that now I'm excited to be here. Right? So use that enthusiasm as an employer, as an employee, to help your studio, to help your owner, and to have these conversations in a way that fosters education and fosters positivity, and really with the end goal being that we all want this place to be the best place it can be. So how do we get there?
Right? And if all else fails, we will be back with the next part two of this,
Yeah.
where we will talk with Lauren about best practices for studio owners.
It goes both ways. It's a two-way street when it comes to this.
Well, thank you so much for that. This is certainly a lot to think about. I'm definitely gonna have to review all this information, all the links that you sent over. We'll include all of the links as well. Again, much of this information is for Massachusetts, but you should definitely check your own state. And if you're out of the country, it will be very different. Um, but right, there's so much to think about, especially if you're wandering around trying to get a job.
Yeah.
One last little story. A friend, she was a dance teacher. She has had no aerial experience at all and was hired at this brand new pop-up aerial studio that also had like teeth whitening. And she would tell me like they were teaching her how to teach aerial silks, and the silks kept falling out of the ceiling. And I was like, so like for the most part, like you said, most business owners are, you know, they're trying their best, but there are some that are just like, what are you doing?
It happens. And it's much more infrequent than it used to be, but it's still out there. And our industry is not unique in that sense. You know, it happens everywhere you go. Like I've been to some gyms that are like regular gyms that are nasty.
Right, yeah.
Gross, nobody's friendly, like just you can tell that they don't give a shit. And you know, that's not as, again, it's not as common as it used to be in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s with more sanitation regulations and certification regulations. But it happens, you know, so you got to be aware.
Gotta be aware. Well,
True.
thank you for taking the time out to help spread the word
Absolutely.
about this.
Simple to
Of
think
course. And I look forward to the next one.
Yes, we definitely need to schedule that ASAP. I'm super interested.
Yes, I was looking at the independent contractor link, and there's just links upon links within
Yes.
the links of information.
You could rabbit hole yourself very easily.
Yeah. And like also too, I know we spoke to Colleen Jolly, who's the founder of the IPIA. She has lots of free resources for pole business owners, but there's really not a lot for like teachers. Just like, when you go out, what to look for.
Correct.
It's important.
And there's a lot. The last thing I'll kind of say is, if you're looking for a place to start as a teacher, start looking at things like personal training. What are kind of the regulations and the guidelines around personal training? Massage therapists, like those kinds of things where people are charging like an hourly rate for a similar service kind of in the wellness industry. And that will kind of at least give you a direction to start in when doing some research. And then kind of you kind of have to take that information and use some common sense, which I know is also rare these days. But take that and apply that, towards your environment and towards what you're making. Look at group class instructors like Zumba instructors, HIIT classes, all of that kind of thing. Like look into kind of what are the guidelines around that, or like how are those people kind of normally paid in gyms. And start your research there if you're not sure where else to go.
Love it. Thank you for that advice.
Absolutely.
Thank you again for taking the time out to meet with us today.
I know we had a late night one today. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. I'm going to go home
So
and
necessary.
curl up in front of my fireplace that hopefully my husband has started for me. So
Thank you so much to everyone who has listened to or watched this episode of Pole on the Call podcast. My name is Mændy Mac.
oh yeah, you have to do our little thing. Looks like I'm ready to fight. There we go. Okay.
Some mobility exercises.